So everybody, we are, oh, Mary, can you hit the, so John was just asking about,
Thank you so much. I will do that. Okay.
John was just asking about the organization of the Bible. And I will say this, it's something to think about right now as we start a new book of the Bible, a new book of the Torah, just to take a moment to look at, last week we finished with Exodus, right? And if we go back into the Tanakh, into the three sections, we've got the Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, the first five. Oh, let me share this. Sorry, I'm not sharing this. Only I'm looking at this right now. Let me share this up for everybody. Here's the first five books of the Bible. Pretty important to look at. We call it the Torah. Some people use the word Torah to be the whole Bible, right? So we sometimes mean the Bible when we really are just talking about the first five books. The Tanakh here has got all the books of the Bible. The Old Testament, as Christians call it. The Hebrew Bible, as scholars will call it. But the first five books is Genesis through Numbers. Today we begin the middle book, the third book, Leviticus. The next section is the books of the prophets, which is actually kind of two sections. There's Joshua through Kings, which are the historical books of the Bible. So if the history starts here with Genesis, it kind of ends in Kings. And this takes us up right to the destruction of the temple, and it pretty much, that's the end of Jewish history in the Bible. It's not the end of Jewish history, it's the end of Jewish history in the Bible. Nothing that comes after Kings really, we don't know it from the Bible. We have to look at other sources. The rabbinic sources, Josephus, who was a Jewish historian during the Roman era, to other writings from Greeks and Romans. But the history of the Jewish people in the Bible kind of ends here. Then we get into the books of the prophets. So we're here on our Tuesday morning, we're right here, which is kind of, we're standing at the precipice of history, because when we are done, we leave history with one or two exceptions, but I'll explain that. So then we get into the prophets, which are the actual books of the prophets that are giving prophecies. And these books are all named after the prophets. And the organization of them in the Hebrew Bible is that we have Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, and they're organized by their length. Isaiah is the longest. He also lives the earliest. Then comes Jeremiah, and then comes Ezekiel. Jeremiah and Ezekiel actually overlap each other. They live around the same time. So historically, they're almost identical as far as when they live. These other prophets, Hosea, Yoel, Amos, all these other prophets, we call them the 12 minor prophets. It's not because they're not important, but if you look at their books, each of these books of Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, Isaiah is the biggest again, but Jeremiah and Ezekiel, if we look at these books, if you add up all of these books together, Hosea all the way through Malachi, they add up to less than the book of Isaiah. So all those 12 books of the prophets are minor because they're minor in length. And so they're smaller than Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. Any of those, one of those big three, those rest of these 12 equal one of those in length. And again, some of these little books of the prophets are really important, like Jonah. And Jonah's only 4 chapters though. Isaiah is 66 chapters. So their comparison in length is just overwhelming. So that's the books of those are the books that make up the second section, the prophets, the Nevi'im, as we call it. The last part, the Ketuvim, the Cha and Tanakh, are the writings. And they're called writings because they really are a miscellany of things. They're a mixture of lots of different kinds of books. The most famous parts of the writings, are the book of Psalms, which are the collections of songs. And that's 150 chapters. 150 chapters are each one of those in an individual song. And there's 150 of them. And then we go into Proverbs and Job, and we call those the wisdom literature. And then we get into the Megillot. These are scrolls that we read, and they're not very long, but we read them at different holidays, and they're actually organized by holidays. Song of Songs, we read at Passover. Ruth, we read at Shavuot. Lamentations, we read at Tisha B'Av. Ecclesiastes, we read at Sukkot. And Esther, we read at Purim. And so they're organized not by when they were written, though Esther was written last of those five. But they're organized by when they're read during the year in the biblical times. In the biblical times, Song of Songs, Passover was the beginning of the year. And Esther, which was the last holiday of the year in the Bible times, happened in the month of Adar during the end of winter, right up to the beginning of spring. So this is why those books are organized. The five Megillot are organized that way. Then we get into the last few books of the Bible. We have the book of Daniel, which is a very unusual book, which has some history in it, but is primarily prophecies. And that is a book that, again, Daniel functions in a lot of ways like a prophet, but because he came after the other prophets, and because the book is so different, it inhabits a different place in the Bible, which is towards the end of the whole Bible. Then we get into Ezra and Nehemiah, where people who live as the temple is being rebuilt. And so they're actually historically the last people that we really encounter a history of. So it goes a little bit beyond Kings because of Ezra and Nehemiah, but just beyond that, like 50 years beyond that. And so this is history, but it's also very important because it tells kind of like, it's inspirational for the return of the Jews. And it kind of, there is history there, but it's not just history. It's kind of a special, those books are both kind of special, kind of like inspirations for the people as they come back. And as I said on the other day, when we were talking about the Samaritans yesterday, these two guys write about how bad the Samaritans were because they were harassing the Judeans in the building of the temple. And then we read about them in Ezra and Nehemiah. And then the last two books, the Chronicles, are very interesting because what are they? They are repetitions of the books of Kings. And we've looked at them because when we look at the book of Kings, we sometimes have to look at the books of Chronicles because there's pieces in the Chronicles that aren't in the books of Kings. But they are almost, in some ways, repetitions of the stories of Kings. But they seem to have kind of a slightly different agenda, which is kind of almost to give more of the concise history of the people rather than to tell the tale in a almost like a Shakespearean tragedy, as we read in the book of Samuel and the book of Kings, which we really see this Davidic dynasty unfold. They're concerned more with kind of like the history and the events that kind of occur. And that's the way the Hebrew Bible ends. It ends with the books of Chronicles. So it actually ends in a way with a historic repetition of how we got to where we are, which is, interestingly, just before Ezra and Nehemiah. If we were going to end with the end of the history, it would be with these two guys, Ezra and Nehemiah. Mm-hmm. And the very last things that we actually we know happened, actually historically, is the book of Esther. Because those recount the stories of Esther and Mordecai, who are living in the Persian Empire. As this stuff is unfolding, Esther and Mordecai are living there after the Jews already returned. So we sometimes forget about the story of Esther, and we'll get to it on our Tuesday morning class. Esther actually was written as a diaspora story for people who could have lived in the land of Israel, just like us. So the story of Esther is an interesting story to me in a lot of ways because it is the story of us in the diaspora. Yes, it is on and it's not blowing hot yet. Hold it. For all those who are watching at home, you're not cold. We're cold in here. It is, by the way, heating.
That's why I'm not there.
Yeah.
Warmed up on.
It didn't warm up or it did? It is warming up, but I told you can leave it on, Joyce.
It
never warmed up?
It never warmed up. There was
Well,
something.
it's gone up 2 degrees. So I'm not sure if it's just Joyce's energy. We could be heated by Joyce's energy right now. You know? By the way,
Yes.
big things, right? Fusion energy.
Yes.
I hope everyone understands. This is
It'll be
big.
Years.
Okay, but it started. But it started. Let's talk about.
Hey, Rabbi, talking about fusion, I had a buddy that was getting his doctorate on fusion many, many, many years ago. So he was one of the pioneers that started working on it.
What did you contact him?
And I haven't talked to him in about 10 years.
Well, this is a big.
I'm sure he's pretty jazzed.
And I have to say, I mean, I was almost in tears thinking about it yesterday because I didn't know that it would ever happened in my
But
life.
it'll never happen in our lifetime.
Yeah, and it's going to take years, as Joyce just said. It's going to take years for us to see realize the fruits of it. But the fact,
Haven't put it in anything.
well, no, but just the fact that they actually could do it
Yes.
is the first step.
It's a miracle.
As people said, it was like the Wright brothers, you
Yes.
know? You didn't go right from the Wright brothers to having a jet, but it didn't take long.
Right.
In the scale of human history, the acceleration of that. So look, you know, to think that we could be independent completely of the oil producing states would be phenomenal.
Yeah, we're all gonna have a laser in our gas tank.
Well, whatever, I don't care. But yeah, the fact that we have an alternative, I mean, I've always been a big nuclear person, but obviously I was, you know, I'm not unrealistic about the dangers of nuclear energy. You know, my feeling was always, yeah, I understand. I don't want to have stuff with, you know, with million-year half-lives in my backyard, but as far as I was concerned, just shoot it at the sun. But anyways, that was my theory a long time ago. Just get off the planet. But anyways, the point is that I hope it turns into what it is potentially, which is a game changer. And what's really cool,
Yes.
it's a Hanukkah miracle.
Yes.
What's the story? So I'm working on my article on the miracle of the fusion energy, what it means during the time of Hanukkah. It's a good one though, right? It's a good connection.
The coins they found.
What?
Story of the coins they just
The
found.
coins that we just found that prove just more of the history of the Maccabees, which is that they were there and that they had a chance to look. One of the things I do with our Hebrew school every year is I just did it on last Sunday. I bring in some of the history from the period. You can actually hold a Maccabean coin. I mean, they're cheap because there's so many of them. We can hold a Maccabean oil lamp, not a menorah, but a little lamp, a little candle holder that they use for lights. I mean, these are things they find all over Israel. And the fact is that we know that the story of Hanukkah happened. We have the history. It's all historically proven. And it's a great thing to be able to see when you go to Israel, the exact places where these people lived and where they fought. And
Evidence.
yeah.
Real, there are things and stuff.
Yeah, and you can actually hold it. You can see it. And this is all everything from the stories of the Maccabees can be verified.
Validated.
It's all real. The reason that we didn't talk about it for so long is again because the rabbis for 2,000 years didn't want people to get excited. They didn't want them to start fighting like the Maccabees, and that story scared them, and it scared people for the potential of what it could do, which is cost Jewish lives. The counter argument is it's not. The Holocaust proved that just because you don't have a Jewish army doesn't mean that Jews aren't going to get killed. So, you know, look, I don't know. It took thousands of years for us to get that through our heads that it doesn't matter. If they're going to kill you, at least have an army to defend yourself.
Exactly.
There's no downside to it. There's no downside. So with that, and again, a little going back to the beginning and to the end, to seeing where we are, we're halfway through the Torah, which is, again, usually about April time is when we get to Vayikra. March, April time, we get to this during the year. And usually we blaze through it because there's a lot of Leviticus, which means, of course, the Levites, pertaining to the Levites in Greek and in English. The word we use, Leviticus, is about priests. And a lot of it's about priests that we still know who the Levites are, still know who the Kohanim are, but they don't function anymore. We don't do these anymore, these sacrifices. We don't do these things. But there are a lot of laws in Leviticus which are not specifically or not solely for just the priests. Now, there are some people who would say, well, maybe they are because it's in the book of Leviticus, but it seems very clear that these laws are not just for the priests. Not only because it's not just the priests who are doing the sacrifices, and that the people need to know how to do the sacrifices and what the priests are doing for them. And we want people to be educated what is being done. And because the people need to buy into the system, if they're bringing the sacrifices, they need to know why they're bringing the sacrifices. But if you look right from the beginning of this book, it says, Adonai called to Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting, saying, speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when any of you present an offering of cattle to Adonai, you shall choose your offering from the herd or from the flock. So the book of Leviticus doesn't open with a commandment for the priests, but a commandment to the Israelite people. It doesn't say, speak to the priests and tell them this. Now, there are many places where Leviticus will say that, those exact words. Speak to Aaron, speak to the priests and say, but it doesn't begin that way. It says, Daber el bnei Israel, speak to the people of Israel. So it starts off with a commandment about how to offer sacrifices and what to do, which is to offer up good things. You shall choose, we'll get to this in a second, actually. But before we leave the first two lines, in Hebrew, by the way, the book isn't called Leviticus. It's called Vayikra, which is the first word. So before we leave the first two lines, let's actually not even leave the first word, which, if you see where I'm pointing to it right here, Vayikra, the first word, is written with a little tiny aleph, the first letter of the alphabet. So here we have an interesting question. Now, here's an example of something that will not be in the King James. It probably won't even be in Glory. Glory has a very good commentary on her Bible, but they probably don't have anything about this. John, do you have a commentary on yours, on the first word? Yeah, does it say anything about the word "and he called"? Okay. So let's take a look at, my question is there anything about the letter Aleph? Nope. Okay. So let's just take a look. I'm just looking to see if Rashi had anything on that one too. No, there isn't a Rashi commentary, and I thought there would be, but because there's other commentary, but I'm not going to go through all of them right now. Actually, you know what? Let me just do one really quick. So let's just look at other commentaries. Let's see. Let's look at one that would be in English.
Hold on, right?
What?
Hold on, the burnt offering.
No, it would be something there.
Vayikra.
And Vayikra on the small olive. Let me just see if there's any. These are all other commentaries. These are all commentaries on the Torah. Let me just see if there's any that are in English.
A lot of sacrifices back.
Oh yeah, we're going to get to that. But let's get to the first. Let's get to the first.
No, wait.
Yes.
Discussed that in Kings. They did.
They did, but they weren't supposed to.
Their children.
We did, but they weren't. I know they were not supposed to do that, right? So they were not supposed to do that. Okay, I was just going to see if there's any commentaries. Glory, does your commentary there? Does that have
I've
any?
got
Olive?
mine, I can read exactly what it says. It's kind of long. Emphasizes that the contents of Leviticus were given to Moses by God at Mount Sinai. Also, the concluding verse, it said 27:34. In more than 50 places, it is said that the Lord spoke to Moses. Modern criticism has attributed practically the whole book to priestly legislation written during or after the exile. But this is without objective evidence, is against the repeated claim of the book to be Mosaic, is against the traditional Jewish view, and runs counter to other Old Testament and New Testament witness. Many items in Leviticus are now seen to be best explained in terms of a second millennium BC date, which is also the most likely time for Moses to have written the Pentateuch. There's no convincing reason not to take at face value the many references to Moses and his work.
Okay, so that's a long way of saying, people say that this was written by a priestly source. That's what the biblical scholarship says, that this was written by a priestly source, which would have been maybe the 7th, 8th century. They say it's probably from the time of Moses, which is a literal, this was written with the rest of the Torah, which they say is the traditional Jewish answer, which of course is that Moses wrote the whole Torah. So, or copied down the whole Torah, that this is a product of Moses. So they're going with that traditional answer. But they also said that according to common biblical scholarship, this was written from one priestly source, the priestly author, who we sometimes abbreviate by the letter P. The P author wrote the book of Leviticus and other sections of Genesis and Exodus. We see Genesis from the very beginning, priestly author. Actually, the first chapter of Genesis, according to biblical scholarship, is written by the priestly author. Look, they're saying it. We think that it's really written by Moses, or was written, again, according to the traditional Jewish teachings. But what was interesting, again, I want to point out one of the things that Glory talked about, or just read from that commentary, was that this idea that that this book is somewhat different from the other books of the Bible is definitely, there's not a lot of narrative here. There's not a lot of story. It comes down to lots of laws and lots of values that the people are supposed to follow. But it is Moses, according to this book, who's delivering this message to the people. It's not the priests who tell you, hey, this is what you need to do. It's Moses telling the people and the priests, this is what you're supposed to do. So that the priests aren't like inventing this. They're not, the priests aren't saying, hey, everybody, you're supposed to offer sacrifices. And they go, well, why? Well, they'd say, because Moses was told by God that this is what we're supposed to do. And that's pretty important. But back to this one, the bottom line is that they did not talk about in that commentary this little olive. And the reason why is because it is a scribal tradition. Now, the important thing is that the site that we use, Sepharia, is a Jewish site. And so what they did is they created a replication of this, of showing that the aleph is small aleph, which is, if you look in a Torah scroll, this aleph is smaller than the aleph that comes after, or any of the other alephs in the Torah. So we have a couple places in the Torah where things are written either smaller or bigger, and they are always written that way. In every Torah scroll in the whole world, you'll see a small aleph. Just like when you get to the Shema in Deuteronomy, we have a big ayin and a big daled, which spells out the word ed, which means to witness, Aleph is small here. Now, there are different traditions on why that is. And as I said before, there's also, when we looked in the Exodus, there's a different way that we write out the Song of the Sea, right? The Micha Mocha section is written out like waves in the Torah. Every year at Simchat Torah, we point out how it's written. We don't usually point out this Vayikra small aleph because actually it's hard to see. And if I told everybody, hey, go up and look at the Torah, you'd have to go right up to it to see how small the aleph is compared to the other letters. Now, why? So there's a lot of writing about it. There's a lot of tradition. There's a lot of commentary about the small aleph. But let me just offer this one tradition. So what it says is that God called Moses. Now, the word Vayikra means to call. Koreh means to call. I'm trying to think of another word that you know that has Koreh in it. It's to say, or it's to call. Well, the word Quran in Arabic comes from the same word, to say, to speak, because the Quran was spoken, was said out loud. But the word Koreh in Hebrew is an important word. But we also use the word kara, which means to happen. And actually in Hebrew, in modern Hebrew today, we say makara, what's happening? Just like we say that in English, right? What's happening? So makara in Hebrew is the slang way of saying, what's going on? How are you? Makara, what's going on? So what's interesting is the aleph though is small. And so the Hebrew letter is written that way for a reason, and you have to write it that way. So what do we learn from it? Why the weird thing? And so the tradition is that Moses, one of the traditions, there's a lot of traditions, a lot of lessons, but one of the ones I like is that when God called Moses, Moses had to make his presence smaller so that he could approach God. And the aleph, the small aleph, is the way that Moses, it represents the way Moses would humble himself or allow for God to inhabit a space within him and kind of in God's presence to allow him to be able to access God. So when God calls Moses, Moses actually has to be able to receive that. Moses actually has to make space for God to kind of connect to him.
Mhm.
And so what happens is that the aleph represents when someone allows somebody else to interface with them by not making themselves, not inhabiting themselves so that they're so full of themselves. So we say that word today. When we say somebody is so full of themselves, it means that there's such arrogance and there's such an inability for anybody to connect with anybody else that they just don't see or feel anybody else. So you have to make a space for that. And even when it came to God, it required Moses to kind of retract himself in order for that to happen. So it's like, Floyd talked about the ego and the id, the super ego, and all these other aspects of ourselves. It's not just the ego, it's all aspects of ourselves. If whoever we are is so predominant that we don't allow ourselves to like exist in any other way other than ourselves, then there's no place for God. And so Moses had to do it, and of course we have to do it too. If we're ever going to access God, we have to literally withdraw from within ourselves a space for God to enter. I know it's kind of a mystical or Kabbalistic kind of idea, but I always thought it's an interesting one because it literally reminds us that if there's no place in yourself for God, then where's God? Where's that peace going to go? Right? If we think that we're full, right? If we think that our puzzle, if you will, is so full, that complete, that we don't have any pieces missing, then there's no place for God's peace to go. So think about it that way. There's a place for God inside of us, inside of who we are, that if we think we're complete, if we think that we're whole, and we think we're full, then there's no place for God. Now, one could also say that when it comes to relationships, and again, I didn't invent this. This is not my invention, but one could also say that same God, the God I thou relationship that we have with God also goes for any relationship that we have. That if we don't have a place for the other to inhabit within us, then there's no way to really have a full relationship with somebody. Because if again, at the end of the day, we think that we're complete, then, and again, it's not that you complete me business, because one person doesn't complete somebody. I'm not saying that, but I mean, that's also kind of the definition of codependency. If you say that only one person can fill that place for you, but this is the challenge that we have as an individual to allow ourselves not to just inhabit our own space, but to allow other people to have a place within us. And that's the lesson of the little aleph, that Moses had to do that. And in order for God to speak to Moses, Moses had to kind of be in that space, which of course is a lesson for us and God and us for other people. So I hope that wasn't too a bizarre of a teaching, but it is only something that you'll see usually in Jewish commentaries, because only Jewish commentaries are going to teach you that the Hebrew is different and it's unusual. It's not the way it's supposed to be. So that's the lesson of the little aleph. So you can look it up. I mean, if you look up little aleph in Vayikra, you'll see lots of things being written over time and different takes on it, and that's just one. But that's the first word. And of course, it's also the first letter of the alphabet. So yeah, there you go. So I still thinking about that. Anyways, bring a choice offering, right? You bring an offering from your flock or herd. If your offering is a burnt offering from the herd, you shall make your offering a male without blemish. You shall bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting for acceptance in your behalf before Adonai. You shall lay a hand upon the head of the burnt offering that it may be acceptable in your behalf in expiation for you. So if you're bringing an animal from your herd, you bring one that is without blemish. It's also a male. These are expensive choice offerings, right? These are offerings that actually are the expensive. Because you can't, again, bring your, as we would call it, your dreck. You can't bring your animals that you wouldn't eat
The
or
one to the litter.
yeah, the ones you wouldn't sell or you wouldn't eat or you wouldn't, that have no value. So when you lay your hand on it, you're also obviously transferring your sins and the sacrifice when you make it is going to be offering for you on your behalf. I mean, that's what it says. And this is just kind of in general terms right now. They're not talking about why these things are going to be offered. We're going to get to that. And here it says, the bull shall be slaughtered before Adonai and Aaron's sons. The priest shall offer the blood, dashing the blood against all sides of the altar, which is the entrance of the tent of meeting. The burnt offering shall be flayed and cut up into sections. The sons of Aaron, the priest, shall put fire on the altar and lay out wood upon the fire. And Aaron's sons, the priest, shall lay out the sections with the head and the suet on the wood that is the fire upon the altar. So this is the way the sacrifices are going to be offered, especially again, we start off with the most expensive one, a bull, right? And that's a pretty big animal. And you can see the way the priests do it, as we said, the way it's laid out in sections. And it says that the entrails, the legs, shall be washed with water. And the priest shall turn the whole into smoke on the altar as a burnt offering, an offering by fire of pleasing odor to the Lord, to Adonai. So this is a bull offering that, whatever bull offering it is, that it is going to create a good amount of smoke, because it's also, according to this, washed, which means it's kind of wet when it goes on, which also means it's going to take longer to burn, and it's going to create a lot of smoke, which means it's not just bloody, but it's also very smoky in there. They're making it smokier by washing it. And here we get to the next kinds of animals, which are sheep. So if your offering is a burnt offering from a flock, a sheep or a goat, you shall again make an offering, a male without blemish. It shall be slaughtered before Adonai on the north side of the altar, and Aaron's sons, the priest, shall dash its blood against all the sides of the altar. Very similar. When it has been cut up into sections, the priest shall lay them out with the head and the suet on the wood that is on the fire upon the altar. The entrails and legs shall be washed with water. The priest shall offer up and turn the whole into smoke on the altar. It is a burnt offering, an offering by fire, again of pleasing odor. The same phrase, pleasing odor before God. Now you can see that, of course, a goat is not going to create as much meat as the bull does. So it's a little different. We don't have this whole thing about, let me see if it's where this other part is different. I know that there's, yeah. Next offering is the birds. Now look at this. If your offering to Adonai is a burnt offering of birds, you shall choose your offerings from turtle doves or pigeons. And again, the Hebrew for that is Yonah, the Jonah, right? Yonah is a turtle dove or a pigeon, tur or a Yonah. Those are seem to be kind of similar birds. The priest shall bring it to the altar, pinch off its head and turn it into smoke at the altar, and its blood shall be drained out against the side of the altar. He shall remove its crop with its contents and cast it into the place of ashes on the east side of the altar. The priest shall tear open its wings without serving it and turn it into smoke on the altar. Upon the wood that is on the fire, it is burnt offering and offering of fire, pleasing odor to Adonai. So that end part is the same, right? Except in this case, because there's no meat on it, there's no real stuff to do. It's not separated, right? It's not cut open in the same way. You do take out the crop and its contents, which again, right here, it says, some people say feathers, but these are, some parts of it, the intestines, right? That you would not burn. But other than that, it's all burnt up. Those are the three types of offerings that we're pretty much going to see throughout the Bible. Not the three reasons that we offer them, but the three animal types that we offer. The cows, bulls, the goats and rams and sheep, and then the birds. Those are the three levels, three types of animals that are offered. Seems pretty simple. However, now we get into the reasons why people offer up these sacrifices. So let's look. Oh, actually, we're not done with, those are the animal offerings. Sorry. We're going to get into the next section, which is the non-living animals. And then we get into why. So now, when a person presents an offering of meal to the Adonai, the offering shall be of choice flour. The offerer shall pour oil upon it, lay frankincense on it, and present it to Aaron's sons, the priests. The priest shall scoop out a handful of its choice flour and oil, as well as all of its frankincense, and this token portion shall turn it into smoke on the altar as an offering by fire of pleasing odor to Adonai. So this is a grain offering, and so it's oil and flour, and it says also, by the way, frankincense. And the remainder of the meal offering shall be for Aaron and his sons, a most holy portion from Adonai's offerings by fire. We're going to get that. Oh, let's read the next section. We'll get back to that. When you present an offering of meal baked in the oven, it shall be of choice flour. Unleavened cakes, which are of ken matzot, with oil mixed in, or unleavened wafers spread with oil. If your offering is a meal offering on a griddle, it shall be of choice flour with oil mixed in, unleavened. Break it into bits and pour oil on it. It is a meal offering. If your offering is meal offering in a pan, it shall be of choice flour and oil. When you present to Adonai a meal offering that is made in any of these ways, it shall be brought to the priest, shall take it up in the altar. The priest shall remove the token portions from the meal offering and turn it into smoke on the altar as an offering by fire of pleasing odor to Adonai. Now, look at this next line. And the remainder of the meal offering shall be for Aaron and his sons, a most holy portion from Adonai's offering by fire. Now that we've seen now a couple of times with this distinction of when it comes to meal offerings, some of it goes to Aaron and his sons. Now, we didn't see that in the first chapter when it talked about the animals. What's interesting, of course, is that a good chunk of the animals that were sacrificed went to Aaron and his sons. Because the Bible doesn't frame these sacrifices to some extent for what they really are, which is a way to keep the priests in business, alive, fed, in some cases, very wealthy. But even the meal offerings were supposed to be set aside. And why? They said it. Now, they didn't say it up here in chapter 1. Right? When they're talking about these meat offerings, they don't talk about how much of it's going to it's not talking about how much is going to the priest. The turtle doves and the pigeons are not going to the priests. It says no part of that is being cut up. But when it talked about here, about the very, very beginning, when it talks about bringing these animals, these flocks, it says that these animals are laying out the sections with the head and the suet and the wood that is on the fire of the altar. Now that means that those sections, those parts of the cow that were offered up were only part of the cow. The really, really good, tasty parts of the cow, those were going to the priests. Most of what was being offered was going to the priests. Yes. So this system, as much as it's about offering things for God, folks, is about the priests getting fed. And why is this important? Because for those of us that are reading on Tuesday mornings about why the priests are so concerned with people offering up sacrifices in Jerusalem, if they go to other places to offer the sacrifices, if they don't come to Jerusalem to the priest to offer sacrifices, they don't eat.
So. Let me ask you. It has to be. Some type of writing that explains. I mean, does God really want all this? Is one slaughterhouse happening? Somebody else had to have written this so that it, right? So that those that were spreading, teaching Judaism, right, were getting fed instead of working. Like did that their job.
Well, yeah, I mean, they were working for God. Look, every ancient people that we know of, that we've ever discovered, had a priestly caste, if you will, right? There was a class of people that were priests. And almost every one of those classes, those castes, were filled by people who were born into it. People in India still know who's a Brahmin. Hell, the word Brahmin isn't even an Indian word anymore. It's an American word. If you're a Brahmin, you're from the high elite of American society. White, WASP Brahmins. The word Brahmin means in America being in the highest caste. Brahmins were the highest level of people in India. I mean, still are to some extent. The caste system still works. So the priests were the highest caste in Judaism to some extent. However, part of that came with a trade-off, which was they were not allowed to own property to some extent, right? They were not given a tribal portion. So they weren't given land. So the only thing that they had was this. The argument would be that there's a trade-off. You have to depend on these people for your livelihood, but you don't have your own territory, right? You don't have your own land. The problem was, by the time of the Romans, the priests were so powerful that they did in fact own property. Because by the time of the Romans, there were no tribal portions anymore. Everything was privately owned, if you will. And so the priests didn't step on anyone's toes by buying the property. So they owned everything around Jerusalem. According to our records, historical records, documentation, the priests were so powerful that they owned everything around Jerusalem. They owned all the land around Jerusalem was owned by priests. So why? Because when there were so many Jews that they couldn't offer sacrifice anymore, we've talked about it, people sent in the monetary equivalent of these sacrifices. They couldn't offer sacrifices for everybody. They couldn't even do it if they wanted to. Even if they ran it 24/7 in the temple, they couldn't offer up a sacrifice for every person. So they allowed a monetary, as the population grew. There was just no way to do it. The system wasn't built for 8 million people. It was built for a couple 100,000 people. It wasn't built for that many people. So we had a problem. It was in the Torah. It was in the Torah, and they couldn't just say we're not doing it anymore. They had to come up with new reasons or new ways, new approaches to keep the system going. And so they had a monetary equivalent, and the priests became super, super wealthy. So this is not feasible. This wasn't feasible eventually. But did God really want these things? It's difficult to say, right? God commands it, or at least God tells Moses to tell the people to do it. The argument, of course, is the priests wrote this themselves. That's the argument. That's the part that Glory read, was that according to biblical scholars, the priests wrote this. The commentary is, no, Moses wrote this. God told him to write it. But if the priests did write it, then of course they're going to tell people this is what God wants you to do. And so then we're left with what we have in the first. Now, this, by the way, is only going to go on for the first couple of chapters. I mean, it only goes up for the first few chapters. This is not my favorite part of the book of Leviticus. This is not my favorite part of the book of any of the books of the Torah. Not the first 5 books, not the whole books of the Torah. This is my least favorite. These are my least 10 favorite chapters, is the discussion of the sacrifices. Why? Because we don't do them anymore. So we're going to go faster through this than we normally do with other things, and maybe the repetition of the Mishkan, because we already read it 5 chapters before, 10 chapters before. But what's interesting about this thing to keep in mind is the fact that this system worked. It worked, didn't work, it worked, they did it, we did it for 1,000 years. For 1,000 years, this is what Jewish people did to pray. It's not the only thing they did. I'm not saying that they didn't pray on their own in their homes. I didn't say that. But what we know that they 100% did is this. And they did this up until the Roman era. Almost exactly the way Moses said to do it. And there were people who said once the temple was destroyed, the whole thing was over. The Sadducees, that's what we call them, the priests, the priestly group Josephus writes about, that the rabbis write about, they checked out. Once the Romans were done with the temple, once the Romans had destroyed it, made it clear that they were not coming back, they were done. A lot of them didn't have kids anymore. They said the religion's over, we're over. And the rabbis, on the other hand, said, it's not over, we'll figure out a new way. But the priest said, what are you talking about? This is the way we've lived for the last 1,000 years. How are we supposed to live now? Can't have a religion without sacrifice. They couldn't comprehend it. But they were priests. Their parents were priests, their grandparents were priests. Folks, we know that worked because the DNA still exists. The DNA tells us that these people were priests, and they stayed priests, and they still are priests. But they haven't had a job for 2,000 years. So here's what it says about these offerings that kept these guys alive. No meal offering that you shall offer to Adonai shall be made with leaven. For no leaven or honey may be turned into smoke as an offering by fire to Adonai. So any of these bread things that they made up were supposed to be unleavened. And they also, as you can see, we're not supposed to have honey in them either. You may bring them to Adonai as an offering of choice products, but they shall not be offered on the altar for a pleasing odor. So you can bring them, which again, let's see what the translation is here. Now, reshit means like the good stuff, but you cannot offer them up on the altar. So, you maybe could bring bread to the temple as an offering, but it wasn't going to be burned up, which of course means that the priests ate it. It's not going on the altar. We'll eat it, but it's not going on the altar. You shall season your every offering of meal with salt. You shall not omit from your meal offering the salt of your covenant with Adonai, with God. With all your offerings, you must offer salt. And this is why we still have a tradition of putting salt on a piece of challah on Shabbos. Now, I don't do that tradition, but there are people who follow that tradition of putting a little salt, of salting the challah that you eat, the first bite of challah. You don't have to salt all of the challah, but you'll see religious Jews salt challah before they eat it, because they're reenacting the priestly offering of salt. It's kind of salty enough for me, but if people want a little salt on their challah, you'll see people doing it. If you wondered why they were doing it, that's why they're doing it. So again, a lot of Jews today don't do it, but my father-in-law does it. You'll see people who grew up religious do it, and it's a tradition, and that's why. Because we're reenacting, even though we're not priests, or some of us are, but we're not doing it in the temple. We'll reenact that offering. Why is it so important? Because salt was valuable. It was like gold. Salt was a commodity. Salt was traded like money. And salt was seen as something, when you put it on an offering, you didn't have to do it. And you did it.
There wasn't refrigeration again, so they had to salt.
Yes. And salt was a way of showing your love for God by putting salt on this stuff. So it was seen as actually making the offering more valuable. We were not the only people that used salt in our offerings. Other groups did. Pagans offered up salt. As a matter of fact, salt was one of those things that they would offer to their gods, and we offered it to our God. We offered up oil on our altar. We offered up wine sometimes as an offering. Anything that you could possibly use as an offering, anything that could be Kodesh, holy, had to be 100% kosher, had to be 100% never offered up to another god and then pulled off and then given over to us. Because once it had been dedicated to a god, it was bad. It was not usable anymore. It's garbage. You can't use something that was dedicated to a god. You can't. And we've talked about this. The Talmud is obsessed with this. Rabbinic Judaism was obsessed with people using things that had been dedicated to the gods. God forbid that you and I use something that was dedicated to a god, which is why all of those things that I just told you are kosher. There's no reason for wine to be kosher. There's no meat in wine. Why is there kosher salt? You never knew.
Make kosher salt.
It's kosher salt. Now they say, well, kosher salt is a style of salt, right? So it's a little, it's a little more, it's a little grainier, right? A little thicker. Yes, it's a little grainier. There's recipes that call for kosher salt because it's a style of salt. It's not just recipes kosher. The reason why there's kosher salt at all is because it was one of those things that could be offered up on the offering. Any of those things needed to be kosher. Now you could say, well, why not flour? Well, flour is being used once it's milled or once it still has to then be mixed in with water and it still needs to go through. But any of these other things like oil, salt, wine, any of those things in their pure state can be offered up. They don't have to be mixed. They're not mixed. They're used in their natural state.
Mm-hmm.
So kosher wine, right? You see that even to this day. And there were arguments, by the way, that if wine was dedicated to Christian stuff, could it be used? Because it's not really idolatry. It's not really pagan. But once it was offered up to God, to Jesus, was that considered not kosher anymore? So there's arguments over that. Well, before you think that, that's funny, right? But think about all the wines and all the brandies and all those alcohols that were made by priests. Benedictine. It's named after the Benedictine monks. Dom Perignon, all these things that were made in a monastery somewhere, these were all made by church people. So there's a discussion, there's debates over it. Well, there's debates over it. There are a lot of traditional people that wouldn't have drunk that stuff because it was made by church people. But again, it was really about idolatry. And again, why is this important? Why is this relevant? It's the story of Hanukkah. Why did there need to be kosher oil? They didn't have oil. Are you kidding me? They didn't have oil for a menorah. They had a menorah and they didn't have oil for it? No, they didn't have kosher oil. They didn't have oil that had a seal on it, which according to the rabbis was why they needed those 8 days to make more oil. Because if they had oil, anybody could have brought oil in, put a little oil in the menorah. No, it had to be oil that was never dedicated to a god. And the only way they could make sure that happened would be if they pressed it themselves. So the story of Hanukkah only makes sense if you understand that oil had to be kosher too. So any of these things that could be offered up on an altar needed to be able to be kosher, if you will. They had to be sure, we had to be sure that they could be okay. And that's why we have kosher salt. And again, to some extent, that's why we have Hanukkah.
What is kosher salt?
Kosher salt?
The blue thing.
Is it kosher?
I don't know, but it's been sitting in my.
I know,
for
well,
about-
I think today kosher salt comes down to, again, what style of salt it is. Because I think any,
It's usually coarser.
it's coarse salt. Yeah, it's coarse salt. So I don't think it's just a matter of a kosher brand. But oil was an issue for the Maccabees. So it isn't a consumable. It's not necessarily oil that we were drinking. It was oil that was going into the menorah. But still, anything that could be used for a god in an offering had to be kosher. Now, interestingly, if you think about it, this next part of stuff is, if you bring a meal offering of first fruits to Adonai, you shall bring new ears, parched with fire grits of the fresh grain, as your meal offering of first fruits. You shall add oil to it and lay frankincense on it as a meal offering. So this is grain that didn't even get turned into flour yet. And the priest shall take a portion of it, token portion of it, into smoke, some of it with grits and oil, and all of it, the frankincense, is an offering by fire to Adonai. So again, all of those are meal offerings. All of those are the chapter 2 was the grain, stuff that we use grain for. Now we're going to get into the whys of why we're doing this. And here we're going to get into the specific offerings. If your offering is a sacrifice of well-being, shlemim, of a shalom, see what the translation here is. No, it doesn't really say here, but if you offer of the herd, whether a male or female, you shall bring before Adonai one without blemish. Glory, does your translation say what a meal of well-being is? Sacrifice of well-being says?
Hold on. If someone's offering is a fellowship offering, what verse? And he offers an animal
3:1.
from the herd, whether male or female, he is to present for the Lord an animal without defect.
But there's anything about well-being?
Let me look in the notes here. See further priestly regulations gives a bunch of verses. Two
Okay.
basic ideas are included in this offering: peace and
Read that
fellowship. What now?
Yeah, read that part.
Two basic ideas are included in this offering: peace and fellowship. The traditional translation is peace offering, a name that comes from the Hebrew word
Shalom.
for the offering, which is related to the Hebrew word shalom, meaning
Shalom.
peace or wholeness. Thus, the offering perhaps symbolized peace between God and man, as well as the inward peace that resulted. The fellowship offering was the only sacrifice of which the offerer might eat a part. Fellowship was involved because the offerer, on the basis of the sacrifice, had fellowship with God and with the priest, who also ate part of the offering. This sacrifice, along with others, was offered by the thousands during the 3 annual festivals in Israel, because multitudes of people came to the temple to worship and share a communal meal. During the monarchy, the animals offered by the people were usually supplemented by large numbers given by the king. At the dedication of the temple, Solomon offered 20,000 cattle and 120,000 sheep and goats as fellowship offerings over a period of 14 days.
So one of the pieces that was towards the beginning of that very long note was that
Yeah, very long.
this is
That was only for verse 1. That was all of the notes for verse 1.
so this is a offering of shlemim, which is again the word shalom, peace. it's interesting that they kind of focused on fellowship, which is, I think, an interesting, just want to say one thing about Glory's note, is that it kind of gives you an idea of one of the things that is important in the Christian Bible and is important in Christianity, which is that people come together for fellowship, which is another way of saying that they eat together. Jews also find that important too. Interestingly, we eat at all of our holidays, at all of our functions, but we really see it as almost a separate thing than with the exception, of course, of Passover, which is a meal that we have together, that we do this ritual. But fellowship is really considered very important. And it's interesting too, because we had a discussion yesterday. We're going to be maybe having a church rent our facility for us over the weekends coming up. They're trying it out this weekend. And one of the reasons that they're, well, it's a challenge here because we don't have a kitchen, and this church actually does practice fellowship after their service. And they actually talk about fellowship at churches, especially small churches like this one, that's thinking of, that is going to rent from us and maybe will rent from us long term, that fellowship is an important part of the day, whether they meet on a Sunday or Seventh-day Adventist meeting on Saturday, that they eat together. It's very important for these small churches to do that. And it's considered part of the experience. Like, you don't miss it. It's like missing church. And so fellowship is, it's why churches have a fellowship hall. Now, it's a social hall. In some places, they use it regularly every Sunday, and in some places use it when they have a big church event. But it's called a fellowship hall for a reason, because they are supposed to practice fellowship there. So Glory's commentary there was really for church people, people who go to church who do expect to have fellowship together. Some churches find it important and some don't. It's very interesting that one of the things that kind of some churches get too big to have fellowship, and that's one of the reasons why people like to find smaller churches, because they like to have fellowship as part of their ritual and not just have a service, but to have the time to have fellowship together. It was very important for the early church, and it was, so Jesus's followers had meals with him. They had meals for their disciples and for their people that followed them. And then the early church really started out in people's homes where people had fellowship together. So it's very important in the Christian Bible, which is why that translation is there. Is that the case here? Probably that's more of a commentary, the church commentary on it. That it, you know, we usually would never have that commentary about fellowship. But we would have a commentary in the Jewish tradition that this is a well-being offering. This is a well-being of shalom, which, as Glory read, is maybe a feeling that people have for well-being with God or with their friends. But it also could have been an offering where people are literally expressing their sense of well-being. That it's not necessarily even thanks, but it's more of an expression of, I'm grateful that I have what I have. And that's not necessarily just thanks, which is sometimes when we see an offering of thanks or well-being, maybe there's a difference. Maybe we don't understand the nuance, but sometimes people just wake up and say, hey, it's enough that I'm okay, that I'm here, that I have what I need. And then sometimes people had a special time when they had something that they were very thankful for. Maybe that they survived an accident, or that they came out of a health scare, or they came out of childbirth, or many things that they could have been thankful for, which they felt that they were extra blessed about. Keep that in mind as we go through these sacrifices. But you'll see that a lot of them, as we're about to get into, have nothing to do with well-being or thanks, but have a lot to do with screwing up. The screwing up sacrifices, the sin offerings, which we'll get to. So this is the offering of well-being, though. Then present from the sacrifice of well-being. You shall lay your hand on the offering at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And Aaron's sons, the priest, shall dash the blood against all sides of the altar. Then present the sacrifice of well-being as an offering by fire to Adonai. The fat that covers the entrails, and all the fat that is about the entrails, the two kidneys and the fat that is on them, that is at the loins, and the protuberance. I love that word, protuberance, on the liver, which you shall remove with the kidneys. Yes, John, What do you say?
Is this for every animal?
Well, this,
You got a line of, 1,000 people?
well,
You know,
that's-
it's a butcher shop.
that's why, eventually they couldn't do this for everybody. This sacrifice of well-being, though, that they would offer, if you notice, Aaron's sons will turn these on the smoke of the offer, on the altar. I just want to make sure you know this. And burnt offering, which is on the wood of the fire, as an offering by fire, pleasing odor to Adonai. So every time you hear the word reach nichoach Adonai, offering a pleasing odor to Adonai, the sacrifice is over. We can move on to the next sacrifice. So when we read this in Hebrew, and now when you read it in English, whenever you see the words pleasing odor to Adonai, reach nichoach Adonai, know that that's that sacrifice. That means we can move on to the next one. So just so you know, every other piece of that cow is going to the priest. So you're not eating the kidneys and the fat and the loins and all those other things. Those you don't eat. But everything else, the priests were eating, which is the part you want to eat. I don't want to eat the kidneys. I mean, I guess there are people who like that, but I don't want to eat that part. I'm not saying God's getting the bad parts, but you're not getting the parts that I want to eat, or I would have eaten. I don't say eat it anymore. But if I was going to eat cow, it ain't those parts. It's kind of weird. If you think about it, you offer up a really nice cow, but you're not really offering up the really good parts of the nice cow. So I find it interesting the priests say, you got to bring a really good cow. Don't bring us any sick cows. But we're going to eat the really good parts of the cow, and then God's going to get the parts that we burn up. We're going to burn up the suet. We're going to burn up the intestines and all those kinds of things. So it is kind of weird. Yeah.
1,000 cows, 100 cows, 200 cows, 100 cows, 50 cows a day. Come on.
Oh, it was more than that. It was 100% more than that. Because we're only at the well-being offerings. And again, how many of these would they offer, right? How many they say, hey, look, we got to move on. We can't do any more well-being. Because remember, they only have one altar. It's not like they can offer this on 10 different altars. You got one altar that they can offer this on. So they can have other guys working on assembly line, cutting up the animals and getting them ready and then bringing in the right parts. 100% that they could do that. But they have to let this stuff burn. It's got to burn. So it's not just that they have to cut it up. It's that they have to let it burn. You can't bring the other stuff on until the other stuff had burned up.
So it might have been a profitable job, but it wasn't very attractive.
No. And clearly there were parts of this job that were more attractive than the others. The priests that were on the low end of the totem pole were obviously the ones that were cutting these animals up. The ones that were the top end were the ones that were sitting up there and going, hey, he gets to say, here, God, have the prayer, have the stuff instead of prayer and walk off. That's the job you wanted to have. But look at us like every other job in the world today. The guy that, gets to be the host of the talk show. He's not doing the work. It's the cameraman and the guy in the booth and the, all the other people running around. And the guy gets to come out and gets to do it. It's no different. So this is the offerings that are well-being. That are cows. Got to go through the ones that are the ones that are the sheep and those. And if you're offering of a sacrifice of well-being to Adonai is from the flock, whether male or female, and again, male or female, you shall offer one without blemish. So this is not like, it's not as expensive as the cow, but if you present a sheep as an offering, you shall bring it before Adonai and lay upon the head of your offering, lay your hand upon it. And it shall be slaughtered before the tent of meeting, and Aaron's son shall dash its blood against the sides of the altar. Again, a lot of blood too, right? Then present as an offering by fire to Adonai the fat from the sacrifice of the well-being, the whole broad tail, which you shall remove close to the backbone, the fat that covers the entrails, and all the fat that is about the entrails. Again, by the way, these were skinned. The animal's skin is not on there, by the way, just so you know. They skin the animals. Except for the birds. These are skinned.
They didn't skin the birds?
No.
They took the feathers out though.
Well, it's not exactly clear. There are some commentaries that they did take off the feathers, but that's why one of the commentaries said it's the feathers. It doesn't say that. There are some people who read that instead of taking out just the what's it called, the crop, that they actually took out the feathers too, but we don't know that. The two kidneys, the fat that's on them, and the loins, and the protuberance on the liver, you shall remove with the kidneys. The priest shall turn those into smoke as the altar, as food, an offering before Adonai. And then we get to the goat. And if your offering is a goat, you shall bring it before Adonai and lay it upon its head, lay a hand on its head. It shall be slaughtered before the tent of meeting, and Aaron's son shall dash its blood against all the sides of the altar, and present it as an offering from it, as an offering of fire to Adonai, the fat that covers the entrails and all the fat that is upon the entrails, the two kidneys and the fat that is upon them, that is at the loins, and the protuberance of the liver, which is you shall remove with the kidneys. The priest shall turn it into smoke on the altar as food, an offering by fire of pleasing odor. All fat is Adonai's. Yay! Isn't that great for God? He gets all the fat. I mean, look, I don't know. They get the rest of the stuff that's not fat. There's a law for all times, throughout the ages, and all your settlements. You must not eat any fat or any blood. Now, it's not no fat. It's not like you can't get rid of fat everywhere. Everybody knows that there's a good marbled steak out there for somebody. You couldn't get rid of the fat, but they're saying overall, you cut it off. You don't eat it.
Better.
Yes, and so they didn't assume that they could get off all the fat, but they cut off the fat in the areas where there just was fat. And areas where there was just fat, you don't use that. You don't eat that. And of course, we already read before, you don't have blood. You don't eat the blood. Now,
Rabbi,
yes,
I just want to read my footnote on that,
yes,
because it's interesting. Israelite sacrifices were not food for the gods, as in other ancient cultures, but were sometimes called food metaphorically, in the sense that they were gifts to God and that he received them with delight.
oh, that's nice. The problem, yeah, I mean, the issue is that it says right here, over and over again, right? It's a pleasing odor to God, right? Uses that
Right.
word over and over again.
Yes.
Reach nichoach l'Adonai. It's a pleasing odor to God, which seems to imply that God likes the smell.
Mhm.
So is it food for the gods? Yes. So because based on what we're giving it over, it's not, we don't believe it's food for the gods, which, as Glory points out, the commentary is saying is different than the way the pagans offered up sacrifices. On the other hand, there seems to be an understanding then that there's something else at play here, which is that God is creating a system, if you will, that allows for Jews to offer up the way their neighbors do, but at the same time, not with the same kinds of ideas about God that make God look like God's just a human being that needs to have really good food. Now, again, you and I would also say today that we understand this system as a way to keep the priests fed and to keep the priests happy, to keep the priests, able to survive. So there is a big emphasis here on the fact that the animals keep the priests alive too. But again, why did God even have sacrifices? Now, look, by the time we get to the book of Isaiah, which we're about to read on Tuesdays, just so you know, when we're done with Kings, we get into the book of Isaiah. Isaiah flatly says to the people, God doesn't want your sacrifices. God wants you to behave well. So Isaiah lived during the time of the priests. According to tradition, he's from a family of priests. He's a priest by birth. He's living in the court of King Ahaz and King Hezekiah. He lives with those guys. He's one of their court people. And he says to the people, stop worrying about whether God wants you to sacrifice or not. Now, that probably wasn't very popular amongst the priests, but he's reminding the people that don't think that this is all God cares about. He doesn't say don't offer up sacrifices, but he does say, you think this is what makes God happy? Now, that gets to the point of why did Jews offer up sacrifices? And the answer that we have, I think, that we're left with, which is, again, does God really want sacrifices, is that did God command these things, or is it in the Bible? As Glory's point is, was there a point to this, which is For Jews, did we have to have sacrifices because we had to worship God like everybody else worshiped their gods, which was with a sacrifice? So if God had said to the people 3,000 years ago, you don't have to offer up sacrifices, they would say, well, what do we do then? What do you mean we don't offer up sacrifices? How do we pray to you? Everybody offers up sacrifices. And so the understanding that we have in Jewish tradition is that God commanded us to offer up sacrifices when we needed to offer up sacrifices so that we could be like everybody else. It was almost like it's a concession to human behavior to say, people need to offer up a sacrifice to their God. Well, then I'll let people offer up sacrifices to me. So then the answer then is, as Maimonides says 800 years ago, Maimonides said, the reason that God let the temple be destroyed by the Romans is because God said, we don't need this anymore. You don't need to do this anymore. Now that's a guy saying it 1,200 years after the fact. Long after Jews proved that they didn't have to have a temple to survive. The priests, the Sadducees wouldn't have listened to Rambam 1,200 years ago before saying, what do you mean you don't need to have sacrifices? We've had sacrifices for 1,000 years. How can you tell us we don't need sacrifices? God demands sacrifices. God's wanted us to have sacrifices for the last 1,000 years. But Maimonides, 1,000 years later, says, you know what? Clearly God didn't need us to have sacrifices. We're still here. We're here. There's now Muslims and Christians and lots of other people, and none of them have sacrifices. And the reason that Maimonides, Maimonides was a brilliant man. He was a brilliant rationalist philosopher. He said, well, human beings evolved enough. And look, now we have Christians and Muslims, and they don't need sacrifices because they came out of us. They were informed by our tradition, and now they don't need it either. Nobody needs it. So human beings evolved to the point that they need sacrifice. And that's what Maimonides said 800 years ago. So he said it, and Jews started, obviously saying it before he said it. He didn't invent that theory, but he said it. He said it publicly. And now Jews have been doing it.
Chopping heads off.
Well, there's human beings, Joyce, that still want to behave the way human beings can behave if they're left to their own devices. Look, there were English chopping off heads 300 years ago, 200 years ago. They were cutting off heads during the French Revolution. So look, people hopefully evolved to the point where they don't need to do that anymore. But yes, and that was right. That was 500 years ago. So people don't all evolve on the same path, or groups don't. The groups didn't. So again, Maimonides said that we evolved to that point where we didn't need it. And fortunately, because we did that, then people didn't need to have it anymore. There's a different take on it from Christianity, right? Christianity said, on the other hand, that when the temple was destroyed right after Jesus, it was destroyed because there was no need for sacrifice anymore, because God provided Jesus the ultimate sacrifice. So there doesn't need to be any more sacrifices. So they had another take on it, which is that we don't need to have sacrifices because he was the last sacrifice. The interesting thing is that the first generations of Christians that lived during the times of the temple when it was still standing still offered sacrifices. So they didn't think that Jesus was a sacrifice originally, but not long after, they interpreted it that way. And they said, look, this is now a great way for us to understand it. Jews understood it in a different way, which is we don't need to have a temple anymore. But I can only tell you that this system worked efficiently, not efficiently. It worked. It was in practice for 1,000 years. That's a long time. There's nothing to sneeze at. Yeah, John.
How did the Jewish priests feed themselves?
Well, that's a good question. So how did the priests feed themselves after the temple was destroyed? Listen, they either adapted or they died or they disappeared. So for the people who said we're checking out, then they didn't, there was no more priests anymore. They didn't have to worry. They didn't have kids. Other priests probably, figured out they had to get their livelihood some other way. Look, when the temple was destroyed and Jerusalem was destroyed, you had to figure that a whole lot of people lost their livelihood, lost their homes, had to figure out how to rebuild. So there was a national crisis for whether you were a priest or you were just the guy living down the street from the priest. Jerusalem was destroyed, your house was destroyed, the Romans took away your livelihood. Hell, if you lived in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago, when the temple was still in operation, you either were a priest or you were making money off the priests. Because why? You had a house that you rented out as an Airbnb to the people who came into Jerusalem for the week of Passover or whatever, during the time of the holidays, they'd come into town. Or you had a little place where you raised pigeons, where people would come in and get a pigeon or two to offer up as a sacrifice. Maybe if you were a little bit more successful, you had a goat farm outside of town, outside the walls, where people would come in and get a goat if they had a goat sacrifice.
So you think some of those stalls inside this?
We believe
Generation.
we believe that they were people. No, John, we believe that listen, those stalls were not there at that time, but underneath those stalls, almost exactly in those same places, we have what's called the Cardo in Jerusalem. And we'll go to the Cardo in a few months. The Cardo was an ancient street of Jewish shops that were there during the time of the temple. It was underneath the level because it was, the levels of destruction. But we found an actual Cardo. We've actually found a street that you can walk on, or you can literally see where during the Roman period, there were streets. Yeah. The Cardo is the street, the Cardo is the road, the street that the shops were on in those times. So people had these shops and they fed the people. People would stop by for some cheese or whatever whatever meal they had in those days when they went to the temple. So everyone in Jerusalem lost their jobs, and they weren't just priests that lost their jobs. Everybody lost their job when Jerusalem was destroyed. So where did they go? They either got out of town and started up in another city, or they gave up. But all these people were out of a job. Adonai spoke to Moses saying, "Speak to the Israelite people thus. When a person unwittingly incurs guilt in regard to any of Adonai's commandments about things not to be done and does one of them," this is the sin offerings, but this is the first kind. Unwittingly, they do it unknowingly. It is if it is the anointed priest who has incurred guilt, so that the blame falls on the people, you shall offer for the sin of which he is guilty a bull of the herd without blemish as a sin offering to Adonai. So if a priest is the guy who unwittingly does something, he has to offer up a bull. He shall bring the bull to the entrance, and obviously this is the most expensive. This is a bull, which is a male cow, the most expensive kind of cow. I'm not being sexist here. I'm just stating a fact that bulls were more expensive, and they had to be without blemish, which means they're really expensive. And he shall bring the bull to the entrance of the tent of meeting before Adonai. You can imagine because we've said it over and over again, what he does. He lays a hand upon the head of the bull. The bull shall be slaughtered before Adonai, and the anointed priest shall take some of the bull's blood and bring it into the tent of meeting, and the priest shall dip his finger in the blood. Now, this is different, because instead of just putting it on the altar, which he will, he dips his finger in the blood and he sprinkles the blood 7 times before Adonai in front of the curtain of the shrine, before the Holy of Holies curtain. He does it first, right? So he dips his finger in blood and then he sprinkles it in front of the curtain. The priest shall put some of the blood on the horns of the altar of aromatic incense. That's not the altar of the sacrificing altar yet, which is the tent of meeting before Adonai. And all the rest of the bull's blood he shall pour at the base of the altar of the burnt offering, which is at the entrance of the tent of meeting. So he put some of the blood on the horns of the altar of where they offered up incense, the small altar. And then he went to the big altar and he poured it at the base of the altar, not on the sides of the altar, as we oftentimes saw, or the horns of the altar, but at the base of the altar. He shall remove all the fat from the bull, the sin of offering, that fat that covers the entrails and all the fat that is about the entrails, and the 2 kidneys and the fat is on them, that is at the loins and the protuberance of the liver, which is he shall remove with the kidneys, just as it is removed from the ox of the sacrifice of well-being. So they go back and say, you remember what you did then? You do that here. The priest shall turn them into smoke on the altar of the burnt offering. And it says, but the hide of the bull and all its flesh, as well its hind and its head and its legs, its entrails and its dung, all the rest of the bull he shall carry to a pure place outside the camp, to the ash heap, and burn it on the wood fire. It shall be burned on the ash heap. And so this is interesting because this one, parts of the cow that were offered before, the bull that was offered before, these ones are not. These ones are burned outside and not on the altar. Just a different type of offering. Now, that's for the priest. If the community leadership of Israel that has erred, and we're going down, I guess you could say, in the classes and the castes, that has erred and the matter escapes notice of the congregation. I don't know if I would translate the word congregation. What does your translation, by the way, Mary, say for verse 13? Yeah, the assembly. It's probably, congregation sounds like it's a worship congregation. It's the group of people that are part of the community, if you will.
Mhm.
So that they
Mine
do,
says community.
community is even better. Well, it's better for the words that we use today. So they do any of the things which by Adonai's commandments ought not to be done, and they realize guilt when the sin through which they incurred guilt becomes known. The congregation shall offer a bull of the herd as a sin offering and bring it before the tent of meeting. The elders of the community, so it's not just the one person who made a mistake, but all the parts of the leaders of the community shall lay their heads upon the head of the bull before Adonai, and the bull shall be slaughtered before Adonai. So here is what happens when the political leaders, if you will. So first the religious leaders, then the political leaders, if they screw up. The anointed priest shall bring some of the blood of the bull into the tent of meeting, and the priest shall dip his finger. And again, the priest does this because the guy can't do it. The guy can't do it because he's not a priest. He can't do this part. So the priest has to do it because the priest can't, is going to do this stuff. The priest shall dip his finger in the blood and sprinkle of it 7 times before Adonai in front of the curtain. So again, right in that same area, same thing. Some of the blood shall be put on the horns of the altar, which is before Adonai, the tent of meeting, and all the rest of the blood shall pour at the base of the altar of burnt offering, which is at the entrance of the tent of meeting. He shall remove all its fat from it and turn it into smoke on the altar. He shall do with this bull just as was done with the priest bull of sin offering. He shall do the same with. The priest shall thus make expiation for them, and they shall be forgiven. So that's for the political leaders. Oh, one more thing, of course, again, he shall carry the bull outside the camp and burn it as he burned the first bull. It is a sin offering of the congregation. In the case of a chieftain who incurs guilt. So now we're talking about, again, political leader, but maybe I don't really love the word chieftain. What does your translation say, Mary? Yeah. Ruler and Glory, what does yours say?
Leader.
A chieftain sounds like some kind of weird, yeah. It's a tribal leader maybe, but it's a Nasi. We use this word, by the way, in modern Hebrew today as the president, not the prime minister. The Nasi is the president. So it's a leader, it's a political leader. In Hebrew, the word Nasi we'd use even for a prince or for a step down from a king, but a president. Remember, in Israel, the president is only a ceremonial leader. The Rosh HaMemshalah is the prime minister, which translates as the head of the government. Rosh HaMemshalah is the way you call the prime minister in Israel, the head of the government. So it's different than a Nasi, but Nasi is definitely an honorific title. Anyways, if he unwittingly does any of the things which by the commandment of his God Adonai ought not to be done, and he realizes his guilt, again, unwittingly, or the sin of which he is guilty is made known, he shall bring as his offering a male goat without blemish. So he's not bringing a bull. He's bringing a goat, which again shows you his lack of power, if you will, compared to the previous 2 levels of people. He shall lay a hand upon the goat's head, and it shall be slaughtered at the spot where the burnt offering is slaughtered before Adonai. There's a sin offering. The priest shall take of his finger some of the blood of the sin offering and put it on the horn of the altar of the burnt offering, and the rest of the blood he shall pour on the base of the altar of burnt offering. interestingly, this one actually says that the blood goes on the horns of the altar of burnt offering and then on the base of the burnt offering. I don't think that was the case for, I'm not sure about the last one. Yeah, both of these were on the, well, this says the horns of the altar, which is before Adonai's tent of meeting, which is similar to what we had here, which is the, when he takes some of the blood, here it says on the horns of the altar of the aromatic incense, which I think is where they're talking about with the second one still, which is at the tent of meeting. And then the rest of the blood goes on the altar of the burnt offering, which is at the entrance of the tent of meeting. So remember that again, the altar of incense is inside the tent. The altar of the burnt offering is outside the tent. It's where the people can come to the altar of the in front of the tent. They can't go inside the tent. Only the priest can go inside the tent. So this one though, because maybe again, because he's on a lower level, his blood doesn't go on the altar inside the tent. It's only inside, it's only at the it's only there. So the altar, yeah, there's the tent of meeting for this one. For the chieftain, for the Nasi, again, use the word Nasi or this ruler. It says the horns of the altar of the burnt offering and the rest of the blood on the base of the altar of burnt offering. So he doesn't get, his blood stuff doesn't go inside the tent. It is a little different. All the fat shall turn on the smoke of the altar like the fat of the sacrifice of well-being. The priest shall make expiation on his behalf for his sin, and he shall be forgiven. Next, we get to the average ordinary guy. If a person from among the population, all right, guy, just the guy, unwittingly incurs guilt by doing any of the things which by Adonai's commandment are not to be done, and realizes his guilt, or the sin of which one is guilty is made known. So either he realizes it, or somebody says to him, oh, by the way, you screwed up. It's made known to him. The person shall bring a female goat. This is not as valuable, without blemish, as an offering for the sin for which that one is guilty. The offerer shall lay a hand upon the head of the sin offering. The sin offering shall be slaughtered at the place of the burnt offering. The priest shall take with his finger some of the blood and put it on the horns of the altar of burnt offering. Again, and the rest of the blood shall be at the base of the altar. So there again, it's not brought into the offering and the altar inside the incense offering. The offerer shall remove all of its fat, just as the fat is removed from the sacrifice of well-being, and the priest shall turn it into smoke on the altar for a pleasing odor to Adonai. The priest shall make expiation for that person, and they shall be forgiven. Now, that's if he offers up the goat. If, again, the same guy, the ordinary guy, can bring a sin offering as a sheep, that person shall bring again a female without blemish. The offerer shall lay a hand upon the head of the sin offering, and it shall be slaughtered as a sin offering at the spot where the burnt offering is slaughtered. The priest shall take of his finger some of the blood of the sin offering and put it on the horns of the altar of the burnt offering, and all the rest of the blood shall be at the base of the altar. And all its fat the offerer shall remove, just as the fat of the sheep of the sacrifice is removed, and his priest shall turn it into smoke on the altar over Adonai's offering by fire. For the sin which one is guilty, the priest shall thus make expiation on behalf of that person who shall be forgiven. All of those were for sins that was done by someone unknowingly. They didn't know they screwed up. They pointed out afterwards. John. Yes.
Did you have a question?
Yes.
I do. I think the scribe was making money by the
Yes.
word.
Yes. We most
Scribe, that's how we made it.
the priest, yes, the priest.
So what we just reference
So
section 3.
so you're talking about the fact that it's repetitious.
Very.
Yes. Yes. So he does occasionally. He'll say you do it as the other one, but he goes through it. Now, again, part of it is because there are variations, right? So there are these minor variations, which is what kind of animal you offer.
Male, female.
Fine, okay, so you have 1 or 2 sentences and the rest you can reference.
Okay, so they didn't do that in those days, right? So there is this look, John, one of the reasons we're powering through these chapters is because they're repetitious. Because we don't even do these things anymore. But look, part of this is there for us to understand that when our ancestors tried to figure out how they were going to worship God and how to fix their problems when they messed up. It's interesting that, again, they had a system, right? They had a system of how they did it. Are our lives complete if we don't know exactly how these sacrifices are being offered? I don't know. Not my favorite part, but rather than cut out the part which we could have done, we could have cut out the first 10 verses, the first 9 chapters of the book of Leviticus. And then everyone's going to say, why'd you cut it out? And I say, well, look, let's look at it. We're going to go through it a little bit faster. As I told you from the outset, it's not my favorite part of the Torah, but it is part. Look, there's a kid out there right now, a boy or a girl right now, studying this for their bat mitzvah coming up in March, and they got to read this. So you think it's bad that we get to read it now? There's some kid who's going to be reading this for 6 months, practicing the same words over and over again. Reach nihoach l'Adonai. Look, I had my own daughters read in their bat mitzvah portions were basically just lists of sacrifices. In the book of Numbers, we have a couple chapters that are sacrifices. Theirs were from the Numbers part. It was not from Leviticus. Look, your boy, he read Achrei Mot, which is from Leviticus. It has a whole bunch of sacrifices in it. We read it at Yom Kippur. Why? Because it's specifically how you fix things after you screw up. And it's very similar to this. Maybe repetitive, and you could have said, hey, go back and read what it said earlier in Leviticus for how you're supposed to sacrifice after you screw up. But they don't. And then the rest of Achrei Mot has some very interesting laws about who you're allowed to sleep with and who you're not allowed to sleep with. And arguably, one of the most famous parts of Achrei Mot is a line that people quote all the time from Leviticus, which is that you're not supposed to sleep with a guy if you're a guy. And guess what? There's people who literally are arguing about this very issue right now because it's in the Torah in Congress right now.
Right.
So if you think that Leviticus isn't important, understand that not only does it have some of the most famous lines in the whole Bible, which we'll get to in the coming weeks, it also has laws and passages and values and statements that people are arguing about at this very minute right now.
Right.
And that I can tell you is a real thing.
Yes.
So let's get through this part because it's not my heart. It's if a person incurs guilt when one has heard a public imprecation, but although able to testify as having either seen or learned of the matter, has not given information that is thus subject to punishment, or when a person touches any impure thing, be it a carcass of an impure beast, or the carcass of impure cattle, or the carcass of impure creeping thing, and the fact has escaped notice and then being impure, that person realizes guilt. Or when a person touches a human impurity, any such impurity whereby someone becomes impure, and though having known about it, the fact has escaped notice, but later that person realizes guilt. These are all things that people can do where they screw up. They may or may not realize that they screwed up. They may have realized that they did it, but they didn't realize they weren't supposed to do it. And some of these things are like, that could happen. I touched something that wasn't kosher. It happens all the time. I touched something that wasn't kosher. Well, if you don't keep, you're not kosher, right? Well, this says again, these are some pretty seriously gross things in some cases. If you touched a mouse, right? Or when a person utters an oath to a bad or good purpose, whatever a human being may utter in an oath, and though having known about it, the fact has escaped notice, but later that person realizes guilt in any of these matters. Upon realizing their guilt in any of these matters, one shall confess having sinned in that way. Yes.
That's breach of contract.
It is.
Now we're getting something I understand. No,
Okay.
No, but that's an oath.
Okay, and so, okay, all right, and so, no, and so when the person realizes their guilt, right? So it means that we're still not at a place where people knew flat out they had done wrong. They didn't know. I'm not 100% sure that this is the right example of it, but I think there's negligible intent and there's not negligible. This is not a question of negligible. Yeah, but I don't,
It mentions that in
I
here.
know, but I think that in this case, this is stuff that people did without intent, right? So upon realizing guilt, right, you have to confess, but then you have to do something about it. You have to confess, but you also have to make an offering. So one shall bring as a penalty to Adonai for the sin of which one is guilty, a female of the flock, sheep or goat, as a sin offering. So this is a little different than the previous offerings, which were guilt offerings when people realized and felt guilty. Here's one where people actually, it was considered, and it's a different word, it's considered a sin offering. I don't know, Gloria, does yours have a commentary of the difference between guilt and sin offering, by the way?
Actually, yes. I sent, hey, John, did you get the thing that I text you? So it says sin offering, mandatory atonement for specific unintentional sin, confession of sin, forgiveness of sin, cleansing from defilement. That's the purpose. And then for guilt offering, mandatory atonement for unintentional sin requiring restitution, cleansing from defilement, make restitution, pay 20% fine.
Well, we haven't gotten to the financials, but yes. Okay, so let's get to this. So there's a difference between guilt and sin. That article didn't say that much about the differences between them, but the priest shall make expiation on that person's behalf. But if one's means do not suffice for a sheep, that person shall bring to the Adonai as a penalty for that which is guilty 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons. One is a sin offering and the other is a burnt offering. So one does the offer of one is specifically for your sin, and then one of them is just kind of offered up, which is interesting because when it talks about making an offering from your flock, you only offer up one, right? But if you offer up birds, you're offering up 2, and one of them kind of takes the, one of them it says here specifically is a burnt offering, and the other is a sin offering. What's the difference? Well, we're going to get to burnt offerings, if you will, or actually kind of already read about burnt offerings, which kind of cover any kind of offering. But it's almost again as if saying that 2 turtle doves are going to be much cheaper than the sheep. The offer shall bring them to the priest, who shall offer the bird for the sin offering, pinching its head at its nape without severing it. Shall sprinkle some of the blood of the sin. It didn't go up that much. It went up 1 degree. Right? You're saying it's 58 degrees.
8 degrees in here.
So it's not working. It's not working. I know.
Yep.
Hold it a second. I know we have 20 minutes, but let me try one thing.
I won't be there Friday night.
Okay, I'm gonna try one other thing. I tried one other button. Give me 1 second.
Kind of late.
Mike was talking about the building of the tabernacle, right?
It's
Just go-
nice.
I don't know what to say. I don't mind it. I know, it's very cool. It is like a meat locker in here. We're waiting for these cows to be here. All right, wait a second. So let's finish this up. I know. Well, I want to finish chapter 5. We're almost done. So you're allowed to bring in the turtle doves, right? You're allowed to bring those in. So it says you shall he's going to sprinkle some of the blood on the side of the altar, and what remains of the blood shall be drained out at the base of the altar as a sin offering. There's not a lot of blood in the turtle dove, right? The second bird he shall prepare as a burnt offering according to the regulation, for which the sin one is guilty, the priest shall make expiation on behalf of that person who shall be forgiven. And it basically there, by the way, kind of says that you just burn it up. And if one does not have means to suffice, right, for 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons, that person shall bring as an offering for that which one is guilty, 1/10 of an ephah of choice flour for sin offering, and one shall not add oil or lay frankincense on it. It's a sin offering. So unlike the other offerings, you're not putting up oil or frankincense on it. The offerer shall bring it to the priest. The priest shall scoop out a handful as a token portion and turn it into smoke on the altar, which Adonai's offerings by fire. It is a sin offering. For whichever of these sins one is guilty, the priest shall make expiation on behalf of that person who shall be forgiven. It shall belong to the priest like the meal offering. Which means the leftover
Whatever.
dough stuff is going to go to the
The fat.
well, yeah, in this case, it's the extra bread. The extra meal goes to him. And Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, when a person commits a trespass, being unwittingly remiss about any of Adonai's sacred things, one shall bring as a penalty Adonai a ram without blemish from the flock, convertible into payment in silver by the sanctuary as a guilt offering. So this is a person who does not do something right when it comes to the sacrifices, right? Or one doesn't do something right there. That person shall make restitution for the remission regarding the sacred thing, adding a 5th part. That's the 20% kickback for a penalty. And it shall be given to the priest. The priest shall make expiation with the ram of the guilt offering on behalf of that person who shall be forgiven. So that is a special situation of when people screw up on holy things, right? And a person who, without knowing it, sins in regards to any of Adonai's commandments about things not to be done, and then realizes guilt, such a person shall be subject to punishment. And here you're going to see again, that person shall bring to the priest a ram without blemish from the flock or the equivalent as a guilt offering. The error committed unwittingly, the priest shall make expiation on behalf of that person who shall be forgiven. It is a guilt offering, which is a slightly different word again than the sin offering. Guilt has been incurred before Adonai. Now it feels like it's getting even colder. Adonai spoke to Adonai. I put on a slightly different. Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, when a person sins and commits a trespass against Adonai by dealing deceitfully with another in the matter of a deposit or pledge. So this is a little different, or through robbery or by defrauding another. This is not by accident or by finding something lost and lying about it. If one swears falsely regarding any of these various things that someone may do and sin thereby, when one has thus sinned, realizing guilt would restore either that which was gotten through robbery or fraud or the entrusted deposit or the thing lost that was found, or anything else about which one swore falsely, that person shall repay principal amount and a 5th part on top of it, right? That's a 20% fee. One shall pay to its owner upon realizing guilt. So yes, it's a 20% penalty, which John doesn't think is very much. But you, of course, have to return the value plus 20%.
Or what?
And then he brings also a ram.
Correct. And then he also does a sacrifice.
Pay back 32 billion, so what's he gonna do?
So, yeah, what happens to the 32 billion? You can't even do it, let alone 20% on the 32 billion. So if you, well, he gave it away. He didn't spend it. He gave it to poor people, supposedly. So then that person, what? Then that person shall bring to the priest as a penalty Adonai a ram without blemish from the flock, or the equivalent as a guilt offering. That priest shall make expiation before Adonai on behalf of that person, and he shall be forgiven for whatever was done to draw blame thereby. Amen. That is the end of that first portion of Leviticus. Now, again, we finished it. We finished it just in time. Now, I will tell you, before you go crazy and say, I'm glad the sacrifices are over. We do not have class next week, so do not come here. You have to come to my house for a vodka and latke party. So
I RSVP.
So we want you to be there. We will not have class on Wednesday, and I can't remember why we had to do vodka latke on Wednesday, But if you're not nearby, if you're like the Schulmans and you're in Texas, or you're like Harvey Kale, who's in Washington, or if there's other people who are not in town. If you're not able to, if you're in Riverside, there's some people in Riverside right now. If you're not in town, I guess have a latke or some vodka without us, but, or send us a picture. We're having the Pasha Award. That's correct. And the award, we're giving out awards at our house because the people are not going to be here Friday night. But watch our Friday night service. On Friday, we're going to have a special Hanukkah, some special Hanukkah music, and we have
Bring your
some
heater.
Hanukkah music on the other service. On the video service, we have some special Hanukkah music as well on the video version. That'll be up at 5 o'clock. Harvey, what were you saying? Harvey, was that you?
That was me.
Oh,
It was mine.
Mike, what were you saying?
Saying, bring your own heater Friday night.
We gotta have this fixed, so
I ain't gonna be there Friday. It's too cold.
I'm gonna leave it on. It's not gonna be too cold. I'm gonna get it warm.
Yeah,
All right,
sure.
everybody. Happy Hanukkah. Stay healthy, everybody, and hopefully you're warmer than we are, but we'll see you later. You know, I don't mind.